Hi and welcome back everyone to another BasePac Digitizing tutorial. I am Britta and I will discuss a bit more theory with you today. So we will look at a few cases where you have some faults in the embroidery, something you might have came across as well already. And I will then show you a few parameters that you can set to even out those faults and to make your embroidery look much nicer on the machine then. Generally, there are two different ways to reach the parameters of your design. So first would be that you go on each and every object. So I would go to punching. This is off and I can now just simply select. Now this satin stitch here is active and I have my tooth wheel here. There are all the parameters regarding my blossom here. Now, if I'm finished with my complete design and I don't want to go into each and every object again, I have the possibility to go into module mode and select with Control the blocks I want to check the parameters of. I go to Edit, Recalculation, and here there are all parameters listed, no matter what kind of program you've used. So what's first? Okay, let's start with this example here. You see we have these gaps here at the sides. So what happens? We program the satin stitch or the tatami with a certain width. Then we run it on the machine and we find out it's much smaller than we've planned it. So maybe the satin here is planned as 1.5 millimeters. I put it on the machine and it's 1.3. The needle and the thread are in the fabric and the frame is moving left to right, front to back. Then the whole thing is pulled, so all the tension of the thread and the needle is happening, and there are then gaps in your design because it gets smaller than it is. Therefore, we're able to set here under covering stitches the so-called pull compensation. With this value, we actually add something to the actual width of our programmed object. This can happen in a percent as well as with an upper bound. These two values have to work together. Now let's switch here to have a look what that means. Let's assume my satin stitch has a varying width. Yeah, so my stitches are short, then they get longer. Percentage means, let's say we add 20%. That means 20% of this is that much, this is more, and then here we have even more. Yeah, to both sides actually. Yeah, so imagine we have 7 millimeter stitches. There will be much more addition compared to the shorter stitches. To not come to a crazy amount of addition, we have our upper bound. So let's say our upper bound is 0.2 millimeters. That means, okay, this is maybe under 0.2 millimeters. This is still under it, but this is now 0.2. So even if the stitches get longer, we add never more than 0.2 millimeters. And this will not be shortened, only until here. Basically, that's each and every digitizer's own secret or its own experience, what kind of values are being set. I would recommend start with an absolute amount, so put this addition here not to 20 but to even 100%. So even here would be a huge amount, but then all of them have not more than none of them really have more than 0.2 millimeters. So in our example, that would be here 99. BasePac can't really accept 100%, so just put it up to 99. And I activate my upper bound and I say not more than 0.2 millimeters. This percentage pull compensation is actually only regarding the satin stitch or the tatami stitch. But you also might come across this expression in the running stitch. Where do we need it in the running stitch? You see here we have a running line with a subline. Now if I program this, I think it looks all neat. Then you run it on the machine and actually this point here will not be perfect at the edge. You will see something like this because all of a sudden the frame changes direction. What we do, we actually program this stitch slightly off, which then evens out this pulling towards this side. Therefore, we have here our overhang. So let's say I add another 0.2 millimeters pocket calculator. You see now this one actually stands out and it will even out the pulling on the machine. Another fault you might come across from time to time in your embroideries is that you have some, let's say, open line there. So it looks like 2 or 3 of the stitch rows were left out and the fabric comes through. This is when the endpoint is not in the optimum position. So let me explain this in the sketch here. Imagine we want to stitch out the letter I, and then for whatever reason we want the endpoint to do here. So I started my fixing here and now I start to fill. Here's my endpoint, but I still have to do the bottom part. So what does I go tuck, 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 and it starts filling from the bottom. No, I had pulling from this side and then I had pulling from this side. Again, thread, needle, material all working together. There will be a wrinkle in this area. If you stitch this out, it normally looks like you would left out a few lines. So the idea is that with this overlap of, let's say, 2 rows, yeah, it went from this side. It will actually do this 2 lines will do double, and then in the end it goes over on top again, so that this wrinkle will be covered up. To set this value, you have here actually under covering stitches, overlap, activate absolute, and say 2 or 4 or 6, always even number of stitch rows.
Another factor that always highly influences the quality of your embroidery are the so-called underlays. So you see here, these are our top stitches, our satin stitches, and underneath you have this running line and also this rough filling here. These are our underlays. On the machine you see they will always be stitched out first before the actual top stitch comes on top.
So here in our example, none of the underlays are active. I activate now the running underlay and I will let it run around the contour. That means there is a running stitch done before the actual top stitches, we call them, so the actual visible stitches are being seen. This is done to fix the material, to make it more stiff and to make it more stable for the stitches to come on top. You have to always check if there is a tiny satin stitch only. Yeah, right now we have here like 4.5 millimeters. If it's too small, you would need to let it run on the center line. We have plenty of space, so I make it now at the contour. Okay, and now it's activated. In addition, we can say we want a fill underlay. So I do this sometimes to, when the top stitches are more open, you want some additional color underneath to make the fabric not visible. Or when you have a terry fabric, and a lot of loops, you want to cover them up, you would go over with a fill underlay. You can do single or double. Okay, and pocket calculator. Now I have an actual zigzag underneath.
Of course, we have many more values to set to optimize the running underlay as much as the fill underlay, but this video would take much longer, so let's stick with the basics for now and then you further explore the other parameters to get even better result. Another thing you might have come across already is that in the satin stitch, in the curves or in the really tight corners, you have a stitch shortening. So these stitches here, every other stitch is getting shorter. So if we have a look at this example here, you see that the shortened stitches is now on 100%. So that means kind of not never, not often, it's like a standard amount. If I would say never, all the stitches would be same length. You see the distance here is kept the same, but inside there's less space to get around the curve, so they would all meet here in the same area. If you then consider a straight corner of a letter or something, you always end up with a hole in your material, especially if you work on piqué fabric. So what we do, we have our stitch shortening and say we do it 100%. That means, yes, whenever necessary, do it. If I say often, it's actually more. So the standard value is always set up on default. Just keep it in the back of your head if you need it one day. The last thing I would like to show you today is the density or distance. So this is basically for the step fill stitch and the satin stitch. And here in this example we have density 4.
The later stage. First of all, we have here the distance. What does that mean? This is my satin stitch and we have a density 4.00. This is in 10th of a millimeter. So actually 0.4 millimeters between this stitch and this stitch. So 0.4 millimeter distance. That means the higher the number, the bigger the distance between one and the next stitch is. So the less stitches you have, the more open your embroidery looks. So let's say you have 4.5. That means you have more open stitches. If we have a density of 3.5, that means they're more dense, and of course also in the same width here, more stitches. So if you want a standard border as a satin and on a stable fabric, you roughly start at 0.4 millimeter. So in this case, for example, we can see here a more open density. You see this case here, you have very small, very thin thread, and the distance would be higher, so it would be more dense, more stitches. Or here, this is a standard NM40 thread, and it would be roughly, I would say, 4 as well.
So these are actually the basic parameters I always double check when I do prepare a design. There are of course a lot of other things you can set, but I would say these are the basic work. Go and explore the other things you can set, especially in the underlay you can make some settings to make it look nicer. And I wish you a lot of success with your own designs, and I speak to you soon. Bye bye.